The phone call that changed everything started with my daughter-in-law sobbing and offering me $3,000 for something she had thrown in the garbage just 1 week earlier. But let me tell you how watching her destroy my gifts led to the most satisfying moment of my entire life. My name is Julie Nicholas, and at 56 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of heartbreak life could throw at me. I've been divorced for 4 years now, and after 30 years of marriage fell apart, I promised myself I'd focus on the relationships that truly mattered. My son Philip has always been the light of my life. He's 30 years old now, works as a marketing manager downtown, and 18 months ago, he married a woman named Virginia. When Philip first brought Virginia home to meet me, I was honestly thrilled. After my divorce, I had been so worried that Philip might pull away from me, the way some adult children do when their parents split up, but here he was, wanting me to meet the woman he loved, wanting my approval and blessing. Virginia seemed perfect for him at first glance. She was 28, beautiful, well-spoken, and had this confidence about her that I admired. She told me she was working on building her career as a fashion blogger, and she had these big dreams about becoming an influencer in the vintage fashion world. I'll be honest with you, I wanted so desperately for Virginia to like me. After my divorce, I had been feeling pretty lonely in my little apartment. I work part-time at a local bookstore now, and while I love the quiet routine of my retired life, there are moments when the silence gets overwhelming. The idea of having a daughter-in-law, someone who might become a real friend, maybe even someone who'd give me grandchildren someday, it filled a hope in my heart that I didn't even realize had been empty. So I started paying attention. I followed Virginia's Instagram account, read her blog posts about fashion and style, and I began to notice patterns in what she loved. She was obsessed with vintage pieces, especially anything from the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds. She would post these long captions about how modern fashion had lost its elegance, how she dreamed of owning authentic vintage pieces but couldn't afford the prices that collectors were charging. She'd share photos of Hermes scarves and Chanel brooches from estate sales, always with captions like, "Someday," or "A girl can dream." That's when I got an idea that felt absolutely perfect. I started visiting estate sales on my weekends off from the bookstore. I'd wake up early on Saturday mornings and drive to different neighborhoods, looking through tables of jewelry and accessories. I wasn't really sure what I was doing at first, but I was learning. I started talking to the dealers, asking questions about what made pieces authentic versus reproduction. I bought a few books about vintage fashion and spent my evenings studying designers and time periods. My neighbor Ruth thought I had lost my mind. She'd see me coming home with small paper bags and boxes, and she'd shake her head and say, "Julie, what are you up to now?" But I was excited in a way I hadn't felt in years. I had a mission, a purpose that felt meaningful. I was going to build a relationship with my daughter-in-law by showing her that I understood her passions, that I supported her dreams. I started saving money from my bookstore paychecks. Instead of buying myself new books or going out for dinner with friends, I was setting aside $20 or $30 here and there. It wasn't much, but over several months, it added up. I had a shoebox under my bed where I kept the vintage pieces I was collecting for Virginia, and every time I added something new, I felt this warm anticipation building. I imagined her face when she opened each gift. I pictured us bonding over fashion history, maybe even going to estate sales together. I fantasized about her calling me Mom Julie, instead of just Julie, and maybe asking for my advice about her blog or her relationship with Philip. These weren't expensive fantasies. They were just dreams of connection, of being valued and appreciated by someone important to my son. But as you'll see, sometimes the people we try hardest to love are the ones who teach us the most painful lessons about our own worth. Let me paint you a picture of who I was before everything happened, because understanding where I started makes the ending so much more meaningful. 4 years ago, when my marriage fell apart, I felt like my entire identity had crumbled with it. For 30 years, I had been Mrs. Richard Nicholas, and suddenly I was just Julie, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment, trying to figure out who I was supposed to be now. The divorce wasn't dramatic or scandalous. It was actually worse than that. It was quiet and sad and inevitable. Richard and I had simply grown into different people who no longer fit together, and, after months of counseling and trying, we both admitted defeat. The hardest part wasn't losing my husband, it was losing my sense of purpose. I had been a librarian for 25 years before retiring, and then I had been a wife, and suddenly I was neither of those things anymore. Philip was my anchor during that time. Even though he was dealing with his own career pressures and had just started dating Virginia seriously, he never made me feel like a burden. He'd call me every few days, stop by with groceries, and include me in his plans whenever he could. When he told me he was planning to propose to Virginia, I saw the happiness radiating from him, and I knew that supporting this relationship was going to be one of the most important things I could do as his mother. Virginia and I had spent some time together during their engagement, but always in group settings, family dinners, birthday parties, casual gatherings where conversation stayed surface level. She was polite to me, but there was this invisible wall between us that I couldn't quite figure out how to break through. She'd smile and nod when I spoke, but I could sense that she saw me as just Philip's mom, rather than someone worth getting to know as an individual. I started noticing things about Virginia that both impressed and worried me. She had this incredible eye for style and could put together outfits that looked like they belonged in fashion magazines. She was ambitious about her blog and talked constantly about her goals for growing her social media following, but there was also this underlying anxiety about money and status that made me sad for her. She'd make comments about not being able to afford the clothes she really wanted, or she'd get visibly upset when she couldn't buy something she'd seen another influencer wearing. After they got married, I made a conscious decision to try harder. I told myself that maybe Virginia just needed time to warm up to me, and that I should be the one to make the extra effort. I started following her Instagram account religiously, reading every blog post she published, and trying to understand her world better. That's when I discovered her obsession with vintage fashion. Virginia would post these dreamy photos of vintage Chanel suits and Hermes scarves, always with captions about how much she wished she could afford authentic pieces from the golden age of fashion. She'd write these long posts about how vintage clothing told stories, how each piece carried history and elegance that modern fashion couldn't replicate. She'd share screenshots from auction sites showing vintage accessories selling for thousands of dollars, always adding comments like, "Someday when I'm successful," or "manifesting this energy." Reading her posts, I felt like I had finally found our connection point. Here was something I could actually help with. I might not understand social media or influencer culture, but I could learn about vintage fashion. I could visit estate sales and antique shops. I could use my teacher's research skills to become educated about designers and time periods. Most importantly, I could afford to buy her some pieces that would make her happy, even if they weren't the museum-quality items she dreamed about. I started spending my Saturday mornings differently. Instead of sleeping in and reading books, I was driving to estate sales in different neighborhoods, learning to spot quality pieces among tables full of costume jewelry and mass-produced accessories. I bought a notebook and started keeping track of what I learned about different designers, what to look for in authentic vintage pieces, and what price ranges were reasonable for my budget. The anticipation of surprising Virginia became my favorite part of each week. I'd imagine her excitement when she realized I had been paying attention to her interests, that I cared enough to learn about something important to her. Virginia's birthday was coming up in March, and I had been planning this moment for months. I had collected 5 carefully chosen vintage pieces, each one selected based on something specific she had posted about or mentioned in conversation. I was so excited that I could barely sleep the night before our family brunch. I had spent weeks preparing for this day. The dining room in my small apartment was decorated with fresh flowers, and I had cooked all of Virginia's favorite foods based on what Philip had told me she liked. I even bought special gift boxes and tissue paper to make the presentation perfect. In my mind, this was going to be the moment when Virginia and I finally connected, when she realized that I wasn't just some annoying mother-in-law, but someone who truly cared about making her happy. When Philip and Virginia arrived that Sunday morning, I was practically vibrating with excitement. Virginia looked beautiful as always, wearing a vintage-inspired dress that I knew she had featured on her blog the week before. She gave me a polite hug and complimented my cooking, but I could sense that familiar distance in her demeanor. Still, I told myself that the gifts were going to change everything. After we finished eating, I brought out the gifts with what I'm sure was embarrassing enthusiasm. "I've been collecting these for months," I told her, unable to contain my smile. "I've been following your blog and paying attention to all the vintage pieces you love, and I wanted to surprise you with some authentic finds." The first gift was a silk scarf from the 1950 seconds that I had found at an estate sale in the wealthy part of town. The dealer had assured me it was authentic, and the pattern was exactly the kind of geometric design that Virginia always shared on her Instagram stories. As she unwrapped it, I watched her face carefully, expecting to see excitement or surprise. Instead, her expression was politely neutral as she held it up to the light. "Oh," she said, examining it closely. "This has some permanent staining along the edges, and the silk feels a bit worn." She folded it back up quickly and set it aside. "But thank you, it's vintage charm, right?" I felt a small stab of disappointment, but I pushed it aside and presented the second gift, a vintage brooch from the 1960 seconds with the classic Chanel-style design she had posted about wanting. Again, I watched her face as she opened it, hoping to see some spark of appreciation. "Is this actually Chanel?" she asked, turning it over in her hands. "Because if it's not authentic, I can't really feature it on my blog. My followers expect genuine vintage pieces, not reproductions." "Well, I'm not entirely sure about the authentication," I admitted, feeling my enthusiasm starting to deflate. "But the style is exactly what you said you loved, and the dealer thought it might be from that era." Virginia's smile became more strained. "I see. The thing is, authentication is really important in the vintage world. Without proper documentation, pieces like this don't really have much value." The third gift was my handmade jewelry box, something I had spent countless evening hours crafting in my apartment. I had sanded and stained the wood myself, lined it with velvet fabric, and even added small compartments based on jewelry organization tips I had seen in her blog posts. This was the gift I was most proud of, the one that represented hours of love and careful work. As Virginia opened it, her reaction was the most disappointing yet. She lifted it out of the box and examined it with what I could only describe as barely concealed dismay. "Oh, this is homemade," she said, and the way she said homemade made it sound like a criticism rather than a recognition of the effort involved. "I made it specifically for you," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "I noticed how you organize your jewelry and your getting ready posts, so I designed the compartments based on what I thought you'd need." "That's thoughtful," Virginia replied, but she set it down quickly and reached for the next gift without really examining the craftsmanship. The fourth and fifth gifts, artisanal perfume and a vintage handbag mirror, received similarly lukewarm responses. With each unwrapping, I felt my hopes crashing down further. Virginia's comments became increasingly pointed. The perfume wasn't a brand she could endorse, the mirror had scratches that would photograph poorly. By the end of the gift exchange, the room felt heavy with tension. Philip kept trying to smooth things over, saying things like, "Mom put so much thought into these," and "Isn't it amazing how much research she did?" But Virginia just smiled tightly and said, "I'm sure she did. I have very specific needs for my brand, though." The brunch ended with Virginia giving me a cold "thank you for the lovely gifts," before immediately asking Philip if they could leave early because she had content to create. As I watched them walk to their car, I felt completely deflated. Months of planning, saving, and hoping had led to this moment of rejection, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had fundamentally misunderstood something important about my daughter-in-law. 2 days after that disastrous birthday brunch, I was still feeling raw and confused about what had gone wrong. I kept replaying Virginia's reactions in my mind, trying to understand where I had miscalculated. Maybe I really didn't understand vintage fashion as well as I thought I did. Maybe my gifts were as disappointing as her expressions had suggested. I was seriously considering giving up on trying to build a relationship with her when my phone rang. It was my neighbor Ruth, and her voice was shaking with anger in a way I had never heard before. "Julie, you need to come outside right now. I'm standing by the dumpsters behind Virginia's apartment building, and you're not going to believe what I'm looking at." I grabbed my keys and rushed outside, my heart already sinking because Ruth's tone told me this was going to be bad news. When I found her standing beside the large green dumpster behind the building where Philip and Virginia lived, Ruth was holding her phone and pointing into the bin with an expression of absolute outrage. "Look at this," she said, her voice tight with fury. "I was walking Buster this morning when I saw Virginia out here throwing things away. She was being so aggressive about it, slamming items down into the dumpster, that I got curious after she went back inside. I peered into the dumpster and felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. There, scattered among the regular garbage, were my gifts, all of them. The silk scarf was crumpled and dirty, with what looked like coffee stains soaking through the delicate fabric. The vintage brooch was lying loose in the garbage, no longer in its protective box. My handmade jewelry box was broken into several pieces, as if it had been thrown down with deliberate force. "Ruth, tell me this isn't what I think it is," I whispered, even though I could clearly see the artisanal perfume bottle shattered against the side of the dumpster. "She threw them away, Julie. Every single gift you gave her. I watched her do it." Ruth's hands were shaking as she held up her phone. I was so angry that I took pictures before I tried to save what I could. Ruth had managed to rescue the scarf and the brooch, though both were damaged. The jewelry box was beyond repair, and the perfume and mirror were completely destroyed. As I held the stained scarf in my hands, I felt a combination of heartbreak and rage that I hadn't experienced since my divorce. "How could she do this?" I asked, more to myself than to Ruth. "These weren't expensive gifts, but they were chosen with love. I spent months collecting these pieces for her." "That's not even the worst part," Ruth said grimly. "When she was throwing them away, she was on the phone with someone, and I heard her laughing. She said something like, 'You should see the cheap junk my mother-in-law thinks passes for vintage fashion,' and I can't believe she thought I'd actually use any of this stuff. That's when something inside me shifted. The sadness I had been feeling transformed into something much more powerful. I realized that this wasn't about my gifts being inadequate or my taste being wrong. This was about Virginia's complete lack of respect for me as a person, her callous disregard for the time, money, and love I had invested in trying to build a relationship with her. But instead of marching over to confront her immediately, which was my first instinct, I decided to do something smarter. I thanked Ruth for rescuing what she could, and I took the damaged scarf home. That afternoon I called my friend Marcus, who owns a vintage clothing authentication service downtown. "Marcus, I need you to look at something for me," I said when I arrived at his shop. "I bought this at an estate sale, and I want to know if it's authentic." Marcus examined the scarf carefully under a magnifying glass, checking the stitching, the silk quality, and the printed pattern. After about 15 minutes, he looked up at me with raised eyebrows. "Julie, where exactly did you find this?" "An estate sale in Brookhaven." "Why?" "This is an authentic Hermes scarf from 1952. Even in this condition, with the staining and damage, it's worth at least $2,800. If it were in perfect condition, you'd be looking at $3,500, maybe more." I stared at him in shock. "Are you absolutely certain?" "Completely certain. The pattern is from their Les Clés collection, and the silk quality and hand-rolling technique are unmistakable. This is the real deal, Julie." As I drove home with the authentication paperwork in my purse, I realized that Virginia had thrown away more money than I make in 2 months at the bookstore. But more importantly, I now had concrete proof of exactly how much she valued my efforts to connect with her. I decided to keep this information to myself and wait to see what would happen next. Exactly 1 week after Virginia's birthday brunch, my phone rang at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was having my coffee and reading, enjoying the quiet start to my Saturday, when I saw Virginia's name on the caller ID. We had never spoken on the phone one-on-one before, so I knew immediately that something significant was happening. "Julie?" Virginia's voice was shaky and desperate in a way I had never heard before. "I need to ask you for a huge favor, and I know I don't really deserve it, but I'm absolutely desperate." "What's wrong, Virginia?" I asked, setting down my coffee cup and preparing myself for whatever was coming. "There's this fashion blogger, Miranda Chen, who has over 2 million followers," Virginia began, speaking so quickly that her words tumbled over each other. "She just posted yesterday that she's putting together a major feature on authentic vintage Hermes scarves for a luxury fashion showcase next month. She's offering $3,000 to anyone who can provide her with a genuine 1,950 seconds Hermes scarf for the photo shoot." I felt my heart start beating faster, but I kept my voice calm. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity for someone. Julie, this could change my entire career," Virginia continued, and I could hear tears in her voice now. "If Miranda features me as the person who found the scarf, and if she mentions my blog in her post, I could gain hundreds of thousands of followers overnight. But I need to find an authentic piece, and I need to find it fast, because she's making her decision by Monday." "I see," I said carefully. "And you're calling me because?" There was a long pause, and then Virginia's voice became even smaller. "Because I made a terrible mistake, Julie. I wasn't thinking clearly after my birthday, and I was having a really stressful week with my blog, and I threw away the gifts you gave me." The audacity of this phone call was breathtaking, but I waited for her to continue. "I know it was horrible of me, and I feel absolutely sick about it," she went on. "But I was wondering if you might have any other vintage scarves, or if you know other estate sale dealers who might have Hermes pieces. I'm willing to pay whatever it costs, Julie. This is my one shot at making it in the fashion world." This was the moment I had been waiting for, though I hadn't known it until it arrived. I could feel the power of the truth sitting in my chest like a warm weight, and I knew that how I handled the next few minutes would define our relationship forever. "Virginia," I said slowly, "you're looking for an authentic 1,950 seconds Hermes scarf?" "Yes, exactly. Any pattern, any condition, as long as it's authenticated." "Do you think you could help me find one?" "You mean like the authentic 1,952 Hermes Les Clés scarf that I gave you for your birthday?" The silence on the other end of the Persani Samesis of Tu Lev Tu phone was so complete that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Virginia's voice came back as barely a whisper. "What did you just say?" "The scarf I gave you last week, Virginia. The one that's currently sitting in my bedroom closet after my neighbor Ruth rescued it from your dumpster. That scarf is an authentic Hermes from 1,952, worth between $2,800 and $3,500. "That's not possible," Virginia said, but her voice was shaking. "That scarf was stained and old and thrown away like garbage," I finished for her. "Along with every other gift I spent months collecting for you. Ruth saw you throwing them away, Virginia. She took pictures. She heard you laughing on the phone about the cheap junk your mother-in-law had given you." The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "Julie, please, I can explain. The authentication paperwork is sitting right here on my kitchen table," I continued. "Marcus Goldstein downtown confirmed it's genuine. That cheap junk you threw away? It's worth more than I make in 2 months at the bookstore." "Oh my God," Virginia whispered. "Julie, please, I'll do anything. I'll pay you $5,000 for that scarf. I'll make a public apology. I'll tell everyone how wrong I was. Please, this is my one chance to make something of myself." "You want to buy the scarf from me?" I asked, my voice steady and calm. "Yes, anything you want. Name your price." I took a deep breath and delivered the words I had been unconsciously preparing for days. "Virginia, that scarf isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. You had your chance to appreciate it, And you chose to throw it in the garbage, along with every other gesture of love I tried to make toward you." The phone call ended with Virginia crying and begging, but I had already made my decision about what came next. After I hung up on Virginia, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, holding the Prime's authentication papers and thinking about what I needed to do next. The feeling washing over me wasn't satisfaction or revenge, it was something much deeper and more important. It was the recognition of my own worth, something I had lost somewhere along the way in my marriage, my divorce, and my desperate attempts to be loved by someone who was never going to value me. But I knew this situation was bigger than just Virginia and me. Philip deserved to know the truth about what had happened, and he deserved to make his own decisions about his marriage with full information. So that afternoon I called my son and asked him to come over alone. When Philip arrived, I showed him everything. Ruth's photos of the gifts in the dumpster, the authentication paperwork for the Hermes scarf, and I told him about Virginia's phone call that morning. I watched my son's face go through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a deep sadness that made my heart ache for him. "Mom, I had no idea," he said, sitting heavily on my couch with his head in his hands. I knew Virginia could be particular about things, but I never imagined she would do something like this. And to lie to me about it afterward. "Philip, I'm not telling you this to break up your marriage," I said carefully. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know who you're married to, and because I needed you to understand why things are going to be different between Virginia and me from now on." We talked for over 2 hours that day. Philip was devastated, not just by Virginia's actions, but by the realization that he had been blind to her treatment of me. He apologized repeatedly for not noticing, for not protecting me from her dismissiveness, for not seeing through her polite facade to the cruelty underneath. "What are you going to do about the scarf?" he asked finally. "I'm keeping it," I said without hesitation. "Not because it's valuable, though that's nice to know. I'm keeping it because every time I look at it, I want to remember this lesson about my own worth." The next few weeks were difficult for everyone. Philip confronted Virginia about everything, and according to him, she tried every strategy she could think of: denial, minimizing, blaming her stress, promising to change. She even wrote me a long email apologizing and begging for another chance to build a relationship. But her words felt hollow to me now, because I understood that her regret wasn't about hurting me, it was about getting caught. Virginia did end up making a public apology on her blog, posting about learning to appreciate handmade gifts and the people who love us enough to make them. The post got a lot of engagement, with people commenting about their own experiences with ungrateful family members. I suppose even her apology became content for her brand, which felt perfectly in character. Philip and Virginia are still married, but their relationship has changed fundamentally. Philip sees her differently now, and according to our conversations, they're in counseling trying to work through the trust issues this situation created. I've made it clear that I'll be civil to Virginia for Philip's sake, but the days of me trying to win her over are over. As for me, I've learned something invaluable about the difference between being kind and being a doormat. For months, I thought Virginia's coldness toward me was my fault, that I wasn't trying hard enough or giving the right gifts or saying the right things. But the truth was much simpler. Some people are incapable of appreciating genuine love and effort, and their inability to value you says nothing about your worth. That Hermes scarf hangs in my closet now, and every morning when I see it, I'm reminded of a crucial lesson. You cannot buy love, you cannot force gratitude, and you should never, ever waste your precious time and energy on people who see your kindness as something to be exploited rather than treasured. The most beautiful part of this whole experience is that it taught me to value myself the way I had been trying to get Virginia to value me. I stopped apologizing for my small apartment, my modest income, my simple gifts. I started seeing my thoughtfulness as a strength rather than a weakness, my capacity for love as a gift rather than a burden. Sometimes the universe has a perfect way of showing people exactly what they've thrown away. In Virginia's case, she threw away a small fortune and a relationship with someone who genuinely cared about her happiness. In my case, I threw away the belief that I needed her approval to feel worthy of love. And honestly, that feels like the most valuable lesson of all.